Hello, I'm Berel Lerner. I teach philosophy in the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies at Western Galilee College in Israel. This is my presentation, Puzzles and Forgiveness in Flatliners, a Jewish reading for the 6th Memory, Guilt, and Shame International Interdisciplinary Conference. So, Flatliners. It was Joel Schumacher's darkly atmospheric 1990 sci-fi thriller film. It tells the story of a group of medical students who secretly undertake a series of daring experiments in which, one by one, they each enter a temporary state of artificially induced clinical death that is carefully designed to allow for successful resuscitation. While dead, here you see an example of what they're doing. While dead, each student encounters some figure from his or her past with whom they have unfinished business. Upon awakening, they discover that those past figures continue to haunt them in the land of the living. Flatliners seems to treat the Promethean hubris of modern medical technology in a rather straightforward way. Humans attempt to steal from God the keys to life and death and suffer the consequences. The fact that the film concludes with the image of a mural depicting the mythological Prometheus stealing fire from the gods would seem to reinforce that impression. However, that simple reading leaves a pair of troubling puzzles unexplained, suggesting that an alternative must be sought. Flatliner's first puzzle involves the motivation behind the students' unusual research project. Nelson, played by Kiefer Sutherland, is the driven initiator and advocate of the experiments. He claims to seek to unlock the secrets of death. He tells us that religion and philosophy have failed in this quest, and now it is the time for science to take over. However, the idea that artificially induced NDEs, near-death experiences, could open the door to a radically new scientific investigation of the afterlife does not really make much sense. For one thing, there is no lack of people who have already undergone naturally occurring NDEs and who are perfectly willing to share their experiences with others. The film itself makes this clear when, in an early scene, we find Rachel, another participant in the project who is played by Julia Roberts, interviewing NDE survivors. Why should Nelson believe that people who experience his artificially induced NDEs will have anything important to add to the reports of people who underwent natural NDEs? Another aspect of the irrationality of the motivation behind Nelson's plan involves the kind of information that he stands to gain from his experiments. NDEs are near-death experiences. They are, by definition, the kind of internal first-person experiences that are extremely difficult for positivistic science to deal with. It is not surprising that Labraccio, a student who is both skeptical regarding the claims of religion and idealistic in his actions, he is played by Kevin Bacon, remains unconvinced by Nelson's descriptions of his own NDE. He feels compelled to experience death himself in order to believe that something genuine had occurred. The gap between the knowledge offered by NDEs and scientific knowledge is further underscored by the role of the camera in Nelson's project. The students are careful to fully document each experiment with a video camera, as if they expect some remarkable external public phenomenon to take place. Of course, the camera never finds anything to record besides the motionless and apparently lifeless bodies of the various experimental subjects. The film's second great puzzle relates to the dissimilarity between the naturally occurring NDEs and the artificially induced NDEs. According to the seminal research article of Sam Parnia and Peter Fenwick, survivors' accounts of NDEs typically include seeing a tunnel, a bright light, deceased relatives, a mystical being, entering a new domain, reaching a point of no return, a review of their lives, as well as out-of-body experiences in which people described a feeling of separation from their bodies and being able to watch themselves as if from a vantage point above. This is all rather different from the artificially induced NDEs that are depicted in Flatliners, which mostly concentrate on singular events from the participants' past life. The film does not only seem to contradict reality on this point, it also contradicts itself. When Rachel interviews NDE survivors, the textbook descriptions they offer of their experiences bear little resemblance to what the medical students went through. At one point, we find Rachel mentioning the cross-cultural universal aspects of NDEs, such as feeling that one is traveling towards a light. Still, even she never stops to ask why the students' experiences do not conform to the universal schema. Things get worse with the introduction of the film's supernatural conceit, that is, the haunting of the students by past acquaintances who had appeared in their NDEs. Such phenomena have no echo in the lives of NDE survivors, either in the film or in research. These two puzzles point to the conclusion that Flatliners is not actually a modern version of the Prometheus myth. It does not spell out the unexpected negative consequences of some dangerous and powerful new technology. There is no medical application for a technique designed to temporarily kill people, and it is unclear whether the experiences of those who are temporarily killed are of much scientific interest. Worse yet, the students' experiences do not match those of people who undergo natural NDEs. Nelson has simply failed to produce a reliable experimental model of death that can be used in scientific research. Nelson does not really manage to steal fire from the gods. Having disposed of the film's false representation of its theme, I will now go on to show how it addresses issues relevant to our conference and critically compare its treatment of those issues with traditional Jewish doctrines. Each of the artificially induced NDEs depicted in Flatliners seems to relate to some past wrong committed by the experimental subject. After returning to life, the students undergo repeated supernatural encounters with people whom they have wronged. Labraccio finds himself the victim of a verbal onslaught from a young girl he used to taunt back in elementary school. Rachel is haunted by her dead father, whose suicide she blames on herself. Joe, played by William Baldwin, is haunted by more complicated misgivings. He has divided his time between medical studies and manipulating women into having sex with him while he secretly videotapes them. His fiancée has discovered the videotapes in his apartment and canceled their wedding. After experiencing his NDE, Joe begins to encounter apparitions of the women he has exploited and sees their accusing images on the screens of televisions and medical monitors. Nelson suffers the most terrifying consequences of his NDE. He is attacked several times by a young boy whose death he helped bring about when he himself was only 9 years old. These scenes of a grown man being physically beaten by a young boy are perhaps the film's most graphically startling images. In effect, the students who sought esoteric knowledge through the exploration of death find themselves thrown back into confrontation with the moral challenges of the land of the living. Instead of uncovering eschatological mysteries, they must face the moral challenges of the mundane world. The apparitions are relentless personifications of moral guilt. Instead of delving into cosmic mysteries, the students now seek atonement. While at first it may appear that the students are drawn by scientific curiosity to experiment with NDEs, it soon becomes clear that the problems they need to solve are spiritual and moral rather than technological and scientific. The remainder of my talk will compare and contrast Flatliners' treatment of those themes with traditional Jewish ideas. Labraccio is the first to discover a way to move forward. He realizes that in order to rid himself of his apparition, he must seek out the girl whom he had bullied. She is now an adult married woman, and apologize to her. He eventually succeeds in this, and after she forgives him, the child apparition ceases haunting him. Labratio is actually acting upon a fundamental tenet of the Jewish doctrine of atonement, as David R. Blumenfeld has explained. Here's the quote from him. When one sins against another, one incurs an obligation to right the wrong one has committed. This is a debt towards the offended party borne by the offender. The more serious the wrong, the more serious the obligation to set it straight. In rabbinic thought, only the offending party can set the wrong aright, and only the offended party can forego the debt of the sin. This means that if I offend someone, it is my responsibility to do whatever it takes to set matters aright. And conversely, if someone has offended me, it is my responsibility to allow the offender to do tshuva, that's Hebrew for repentance, that is, to correct the wrong done to me. Given that Flatliners seems to explicitly endorse this basic principle, it will be interesting to analyze the various moral situations it presents in terms of the traditional Jewish doctrine of atonement. As I've argued above, the artificially induced NDEs depicted in Flatliners are quite unlike the naturally occurring variety. The logical explanation seems to be that the experiences and the protagonist's subsequent encounters with apparitions are unusual events resulting from some kind of special divine intervention, a view actually expressed by some of the film's protagonists. These interventions, however, do not always make complete sense in terms of Jewish notions of sin and atonement. Of the 4 cases presented, 3 involve events from the characters' childhoods. Given Nelson's drive and ambition, it is hardly credible that he has never done anything unethical as an adult. Nevertheless, he is only required to atone for his childhood sin. Labratio has no doubt lived a more ethical life than Nelson, but it is also unimaginable that he has never mistreated anyone since bullying the girl in the playground. As we shall see, Rachel is a special case. Given the enduring impact of Freudian ideas on contemporary popular culture, it is not surprising that the film insists on the crucial spiritual importance of childhood experiences. However, from a Jewish traditional perspective, this is completely unintelligible. Both Nelson and Labratio were minors when they committed their offenses. According to Jewish law, minors can be disciplined by their parents or teachers for educational purposes, but they cannot actually be held accountable for their actions. Even Labratio seems to be aware of this problem when he cries out to God in Nelson's defense. It was a mistake. He was just a little kid. While it may be quite beneficial for people to reconcile themselves with the victims of their childhood misbehavior, objectively speaking, it is not clear why they really have anything for which to apologize. Why would God choose, from all the sins the students had committed in the course of their lives, to direct his attention to those sins which were committed before they had fully developed an adult moral sensibility and responsibility? Nelson seems to be in a particularly difficult predicament. He had participated in the hazing and unintentional killing of a boy. With the boy now dead, how can forgiveness be gained? First, Nelson visits the boy's grave, but that will not do. He concludes that he has only left one avenue of atonement. He must endure another NDE. That experience consists of a reenactment of his childhood sin, only that Nelson finds himself playing the role of the beleaguered victim. After this, his actual victim signals his forgiveness. Under normal circumstances, a similar predicament would seem to present a kind of cul-de-sac for the traditional Jewish doctrine of atonement, or it would at least require the penitent's death, perhaps. If the victim is dead, how can his forgiveness be obtained? As usual, the Jewish tradition suggests a way out for people in such a predicament. Moses Maimonides summarizes the Talmudic teachings on this issue in his authoritative Mishneh Torah, or Code of Jewish Law. If one sins against one's fellow and the fellow dies before he is asked forgiveness, the sinner should bring 10 people and stand them by his grave and say before them, I have sinned to the Lord God of Israel and to so-and-so, for I have done such and such to him. If he owes him money, he shall return it to his heirs. If he does not know who shall inherit, he should leave it with the court and confess. While Flatliners requires a heroic and unusual solution to its newly discovered problem of gaining forgiveness from the dead, Judaism, which has lived with the problem for millennia, has created a standard communally based method for dealing with such situations. Rachel's predicament is especially interesting in traditional Jewish terms. It ends up that she has nothing to apologize for. Rather, it is she who must forgive her dead father for his drug addiction and suicide. Rachel's case is then one in which an adult caused a child to suffer. While an adult can certainly incur guilt by injuring a child, it is far from clear whether a child is competent to forgive an adult. As Blumenthal points out, the forgiving of an offense has the same conceptual structure as the forgiving of a debt. In Jewish law, the competency of minors to forgive debts owed them is a matter of controversy. This situation suggests the possibility that minors are incompetent to forgive those who sin against them, a notion that has given rise to stories about saintly adults who, after slightly insulting a child, seek him out at his bar mitzvah celebration, in which the child becomes an adult. In order to ask forgiveness on the very first day, the child is legally empowered to offer forgiveness. In a way, this is what happens to Rachel. As a young girl, she was incapable of understanding her father's situation and death. Only now, as an adult woman, is she truly capable of forgiving him. Finally, we are left with Joe, the only one of the students who does not achieve closure by the end of the film. Significantly, he is also worst off in terms of traditional Judaism. Unlike Nelson and Labraccio, Joe committed his sins as a fully responsible adult. Furthermore, his sins are serious and his victims numerous. His apartment contains a whole library of cassettes documenting his sexual encounters with women he had deceitfully seduced and then videotaped without gaining their permission. For such a person, the search for atonement will become a lifelong project. He must reconcile himself with each and every one of his victims. Let us conclude by taking stock of the comparison of Flatliners with traditional Jewish doctrine. Both agree that it is crucial for a sinner to gain the forgiveness of his victims. For Flatliners, this is Labraccio's great discovery, the only real breakthrough born of the NDE project. For Judaism, it is an ancient and obvious principle. Flatliners place great emphasis on the sins of childhood, but this makes little sense in Jewish terms, since it would be unfair to hold children accountable for their actions. Both the film and Judaism recognize the difficult predicament of penitents whose victims are no longer alive, but Judaism has created communal rituals to deal with such circumstances. Finally, both Flatliners and Judaism agree that people who have sinned against a great number of victims will have the hardest time achieving atonement, since they will be required to seek the forgiveness of every individual they have hurt. Thank you very much. If anyone would like to contact me, here is my email address.